The inner war between ego and soul, Jung's battle within us all. Why do we feel torn between who we are and who we're meant to be? Between the voice that says fit in and the whisper that says wake up. Every human being carries this invisible war inside them. The battle between the ego, the fragile identity we build to survive, and the soul, the vast eternal force that longs to be whole. Carl Jung called this tension the drama of individuation, the journey of reconciling our divided selves. In an age of constant distraction and artificial self-image, this battle has never been fiercer. The ego thrives on appearances, control, and certainty. The soul, on the other hand, demands surrender, truth, and depth. One seeks validation, the other seeks meaning. And until they learn to coexist, the psyche remains at war, restless, anxious, half alive. This is not just a theory, it's the human condition. Jung believed that every depression, addiction, or crisis is a message from the soul, a rebellion against the tyranny of the false self. In this exploration, we'll journey through Jung's inner landscape, where light and shadow meet, to discover how peace is found not by destroying the ego, but by transforming it into a bridge toward the divine within. Part 1. The Mask and the Shadow, the birth of the inner conflict. Every child begins whole. There is no division, no mask, no hidden face, only raw being, curious, spontaneous, and unashamed. In those early years, we live close to the source of life itself, but the world, with its rules and expectations, cannot tolerate such wildness for long. Parents, teachers, and culture begin their patient work of shaping us, whispering that some parts of us are good and others are bad. What follows is the quiet catastrophe of the psyche, the splitting of the self. Carl Jung called the social face we construct the persona, the mask through which we meet the world. It is not evil, it is necessary. We cannot exist in society without some adaptation to its codes. The persona is the diplomat of the soul, translating inner chaos into acceptable form. Yet, as the mask hardens, something tragic happens. We begin to mistake it for who we are. Behind the mask, all the exiled parts of us gather. The rage, the desire, the grief, the strange intuitions that once made us feel alive. Jung named this buried constellation the shadow. It is the repository of everything we deny in ourselves. Yet it is also the wellspring of creativity, vitality, and truth. Every time we say, "That's not me," a fragment of life disappears into that darkness. Thus begins the inner war. The ego, craving acceptance, versus the soul, demanding wholeness. Society rewards conformity, but the unconscious demands integration. The more we repress, the more the shadow grows, whispering in dreams, sabotaging our ambitions, haunting our relationships. What we call bad luck, or self-sabotage, is often the shadow's rebellion against the tyranny of the mask. Jung discovered this not in theory, but in crisis. In his mid-30s, after his break with Freud, he entered what he called his confrontation with the unconscious. For years, he was tormented by visions, fantasies, and inner dialogues that nearly broke his mind. Yet he realized that what appeared as madness was a sacred descent. The ego must fall into darkness to find the light hidden beneath it. Only by facing the shadow could he discover the self, the deeper totality of the psyche that embraces both light and dark. We live today in a civilization addicted to persona. Social media has turned identity into theater, authenticity into performance. We curate every gesture to project an image: successful, spiritual, happy, unique. The mask has become the self, but the cost is anxiety, emptiness, and quiet despair. Because the soul knows the difference. When the outer image grows too distant from the inner truth, the psyche revolts. Depression, burnout, or moral collapse are often its language of protest. Jung taught that what we repress in ourselves does not disappear. It waits. The anger we deny turns into self-criticism. The vulnerability we hide becomes coldness. The sexuality we fear morphs into judgment. The shadow insists on expression, whether through dreams, art, or destruction. That is why evil so often appears in those who believe themselves pure. The unacknowledged darkness finds another way to speak. To encounter the shadow is to begin the real work of adulthood. It demands humility, the willingness to see that we are not who we pretend to be. Most people resist this encounter. We cling to the mask because it offers safety, a stable identity, a sense of belonging. But that safety is an illusion. The more we identify with the persona, the more fragile it becomes. A single failure, rejection, or loss can shatter it, leaving the ego terrified and exposed. This is the spiritual meaning of midlife crisis. When the outer story collapses, the career, the marriage, the role, the repressed life of the soul surges up, demanding attention. The person who seemed confident becomes lost. The obedient becomes rebellious. The successful becomes disillusioned. Jung saw this not as pathology, but as initiation. The old ego must die so that a fuller self can be born. Our modern world has medicalized this process, labeling it depression or anxiety. But Jung would say, the soul is not sick, it is calling. The symptoms are messages, not malfunctions. They tell us that something essential has been left behind in the shadow. Healing begins when we listen. To listen means to descend, to face the inner stranger we have feared. In dreams, the shadow often appears as an opponent, an intruder, or a dark double. Jung wrote that the dream figure we most despise contains the very quality we most need to integrate. The coward dreams of courage. The cruel man dreams of tenderness. The saint dreams of temptation. Integration does not mean becoming good. It means becoming whole. But the ego resists. It was built to maintain order, to keep the chaos out. So it defends itself with projection. Whatever we cannot accept in ourselves, we see in others. This is why hatred is so intoxicating. It allows us to fight our own darkness on someone else's face. Every moral crusade, every ideological war hides a personal shadow. Jung warned that the greatest danger to humanity is not the shadow itself, but our refusal to see it in ourselves. Yet within this darkness lies the beginning of wisdom. For the shadow is not merely evil, it is energy. The instincts we repress are also sources of life. Our aggression, when integrated, becomes strength. Our envy becomes aspiration. Our fear becomes sensitivity. The task is not to annihilate the shadow, but to redeem it, to find the divine spark hidden in the mud. This is the first act in the drama of individuation. The mask must crack. The hidden face must emerge. The ego must learn humility before the vastness of the unconscious. Jung compared it to the alchemical process, the negredo, the blackening, where the old identity dissolves. Only through that dark night does transformation become possible. To face the shadow is to admit, I am not the hero of my story. I am the battlefield itself. Part 2. The Alchemy of the Psyche, Ego, Soul, and the Battle for Inner Unity. Every myth about gods and demons is also a story about the human soul. Behind the temples of ancient Greece, the deserts of the prophets, and the cathedrals of Europe lies one common battlefield, the psyche itself. The war between light and dark, heaven and hell, is not out there. It is within. Carl Jung understood this with a radical clarity. He saw that our spiritual and psychological health depend on one thing: reconciling the opposites inside us. After his terrifying descent into the unconscious, Jung began to perceive that the conflict between the ego and the soul is not a moral battle between good and evil, but a dynamic tension between order and vitality, between control and life. The ego, like a well-meaning ruler, seeks security and coherence. It builds a map of the world to survive. But the soul, the deeper self, belongs to something vast, irrational, and timeless. It speaks in symbols, dreams, and emotions that cannot be contained by logic. The moment the ego tries to dominate that force, it begins to suffocate. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong dialogue between the conscious mind and the unconscious depths, where each must learn from the other. The ego provides direction, but the soul provides meaning. To lose either is to become unbalanced, either chaotic or dead inside. The modern person, Jung observed, is tragically unbalanced toward the ego. Our civilization prizes control, productivity, and rationality. We have built machines that obey us, but forgotten how to listen to our own depths. The result is an epidemic of anxiety and emptiness. We are materially rich and spiritually starved. We have mastered the external world and lost the inner one. This is where the shadow once feared becomes indispensable. It is the bridge back to life. The very impulses we condemn, anger, lust, jealousy, fear, are not mere sins. They are distorted signals of unmet needs and repressed vitality. The goal is not to cure them, but to understand them. Jung often said that the shadow, once integrated, becomes 90% pure gold. The alchemy of the psyche begins when we stop fighting our darkness and start conversing with it. But how do we do this? Jung's own method was not a doctrine, but a dialogue. He developed what he called active imagination, a practice of entering into communication with the unconscious. Instead of analyzing a dream like a puzzle, he treated it as a living message. He would visualize himself descending into its scenes, meeting its figures, and asking them what they wanted. These figures were not mere fantasies. They were autonomous fragments of his own psyche, carrying wisdom his conscious mind lacked. Through this process, Jung encountered his own soul, which he called anima, the inner feminine that mediates between the ego and the unconscious. She appeared to him as a mysterious figure named Salome, guiding and challenging him through his visions. In Jung's system, every man carries an anima, and every woman an animus, the inner masculine. These archetypes are not about gender, but about polarity. They represent the hidden half of our being that we must reclaim to become whole. This is one of Jung's greatest insights. Every person is inwardly two. The man who denies his sensitivity becomes rigid and tyrannical. The woman who denies her assertiveness becomes submissive and resentful. Our culture reinforces these splits. Be strong, be nice, don't cry, don't be angry, until the soul's natural duality is fractured. The task of individuation is to reunite what life has divided. But reunion is not peace, it is fire. The meeting of opposites creates tension, and that tension is the crucible of transformation. Jung compared it to alchemy, where lead becomes gold not through purity, but through union, through the heated merging of what was once opposed. The same is true in the psyche. The shadow must embrace the persona. The anima must meet the animus. The ego must bow to the self. Only through this sacred friction can consciousness expand. To understand this more deeply, Jung turned to myth and religion. He saw Christ and the devil not as literal figures, but as symbols of the divided psyche. The crucifixion, he suggested, represents the suffering required to reconcile opposites, the death of the isolated ego so that a larger wholeness may emerge. Likewise, in alchemical texts, the union of the sun, masculine consciousness, and the moon, feminine soul, creates the philosopher's stone, the symbol of integrated being. Jung's contemporaries mocked him for this. Freud accused him of mysticism. Scientists dismissed him as a heretic. But Jung understood that psychology divorced from the sacred becomes sterile. He insisted that the human mind cannot be healed without meaning. Man cannot stand a meaningless life, he wrote. He is a creature that demands significance. Our addictions, compulsions, and depressions are not merely disorders. They are the soul's rebellion against meaninglessness. To ignore the soul is to live half dead. The ego may achieve success, wealth, even fame, but the inner life withers. You see it everywhere. The celebrity who collapses despite everything, the professional who feels empty after reaching the top, the seeker who chases spiritual highs but fears silence. These are not failures of willpower. They are symptoms of psychic imbalance. The ego has conquered the world but lost the self. And yet within every breakdown hides a possibility. Jung often said that the unconscious never sends us problems without also sending the potential for healing. The very symptom that torments us points toward the energy that can redeem us, if only we face it consciously. The addict's craving reveals a hunger for transcendence. The perfectionist's anxiety hides a longing for self-acceptance. The angry man's rage covers a wound of powerlessness. To bring awareness into these shadows is to transmute suffering into strength. But this process demands courage, what Jung called moral courage, the willingness to see oneself truthfully. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, he wrote, but by making the darkness conscious. Most people want inspiration, not integration. They want to feel good, not to see their own capacity for evil. But until we face our inner darkness, we project it outward, onto enemies, ideologies, and scapegoats, and the world burns with our disowned fire. The true spiritual path, Jung suggested, is not ascent, but descent. It is the willingness to descend into the labyrinth of one's own psyche, to meet the monsters that live there, and to discover that they too are part of the divine design. This descent is what every mythic hero endures. Orpheus into Hades, Christ into hell, Buddha under the Bodhi tree. They are not stories of escape from darkness, but of transformation through it. In the modern world, the descent takes a quieter form. It might be a nervous breakdown, a loss, an identity crisis, events that strip us of control and force us to confront the depths. In that moment, the ego trembles, but the soul awakens. The old self dissolves, and something vaster begins to speak. Jung called this the self, the totality of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious, personal and collective. The self is not a part of us. It is the whole we belong to. The ego cannot achieve the self. It can only surrender to it. And this surrender feels like death because, to the ego, it is. But out of that death comes rebirth. The person who once sought control begins to trust the inner flow of life. The one who feared failure finds meaning in vulnerability. The one who chased perfection learns to love imperfection as the texture of reality itself. This is the secret Jung discovered in his own madness, that the unconscious is not a chaos to be feared, but a cosmos waiting to be understood. The shadow, the anima, the archetypes, they are not enemies, but guides. The soul is not trying to destroy us, it is trying to make us whole. And yet this truth cannot be merely believed, it must be lived. The inner war between ego and soul never ends completely. It is a rhythm, not a resolution. The task is not to silence the conflict, but to transform it into dialogue. The ego must learn to serve the self, just as the conscious mind must remain open to the wisdom of dreams. Harmony is not the absence of struggle, it is the music born of it. That is the alchemy of the psyche. Out of the friction of opposites, consciousness expands. Out of the fire of conflict, gold is made. Part 3, the return to the self. Healing, freedom, and the union of opposites. There comes a moment in every inner journey when one realizes that the battle itself was never the enemy. The conflict between ego and soul, the fear, the shame, the longing, the endless contradictions, was not a curse but a calling. Carl Jung came to see that what we call suffering is often the self attempting to awaken the personality, breaking through the shell of the ego like light through stone. When Jung emerged from his years of descent into the unconscious, his red book years, where visions haunted and guided him, he understood that the purpose of the psyche is not peace in the ordinary sense. It is wholeness. Wholeness includes everything the ego wanted to exclude: the wound, the desire, the anger, the doubt, the shadow, the divine. And so the path of healing is not upward toward perfection, but inward toward integration. The ego wants to be good. The self wants to be whole. The ego wants to win. The self wants to unite. These two desires pull us in opposite directions until one learns to surrender to the other. Jung's entire psychology was built around that surrender, not a passive collapse, but an active participation in one's own transformation. He called it the individuation process, the movement by which the conscious and unconscious parts of the psyche come into a living dialogue. He saw it everywhere, in myth, in alchemy, in religion. In ancient alchemical texts, the transformation of base metal into gold symbolized the transformation of human consciousness. The nigredo, the black stage of decomposition, represented despair and confusion. The albedo, the whitening, symbolized purification. Finally, the rubedo, the reddening, marked integration, the moment when spirit and matter unite. Jung realized that this ancient process was a psychological truth disguised in metaphor. Every person must pass through their own nigredo, their own darkness, before awakening to the self. This is why so many spiritual awakenings begin in crisis. Depression, loss, addiction, failure. These are not signs of weakness, but invitations to depth. They dismantle the persona, the mask that keeps the ego comfortable, and force the soul to speak. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. The pain is not punishment, it is purification. It burns away illusion until what remains is real. Modern psychology often seeks to eliminate suffering. Jung dared to redeem it. He saw that every symptom carries a secret wisdom. The anxiety that paralyzes us might be the psyche's way of alerting us to a truth we refuse to see. The depression that deadens us might be the soul's demand for authenticity. Healing, then, does not mean silencing the symptom, but listening to it, decoding the message it carries. To do this, Jung returned to the forgotten language of the soul. Symbols, dreams, art, religion, all are the psyche's way of communicating truths too vast for reason. The modern ego speaks in words, the soul speaks in images. When we ignore those images, we lose touch with meaning. When we restore their place, the psyche begins to heal itself. Jung's patients often arrived feeling lost and disoriented. Rather than giving them direct advice, he would ask them to describe their dreams, to draw, to write, to imagine. He treated the unconscious not as a problem to fix, but as a partner in dialogue. Over time, these symbols began to reveal a pattern, the emergence of what Jung called the self, the organizing center of the psyche that guides the individual toward wholeness. It was not the ego discovering the self. It was the self revealing itself through the ego. Jung compared this to the relationship between the sun and the planets. The ego, like a planet, believes it is moving under its own power, but in truth it revolves around a hidden sun, the self. Most people never realize this. They remain caught in the illusion of control, mistaking their orbit for freedom. But once one glimpses the sun, everything changes. The orbit becomes conscious. Life, once random, begins to feel guided, not by fate, but by a deeper intelligence within. Yet this realization is not without cost. The moment the ego becomes aware of the self, it faces its own smallness. It realizes it is not the center, but a servant of something larger. Many resist this moment. They flee back into distraction or ideology. To accept the self is to accept humility. It means admitting that you are not the author of your story, but a participant in a cosmic drama that transcends you. This is why Jung called the self a numinous experience, a meeting with the divine. He did not mean God in the religious sense of dogma, but as the living presence of wholeness that permeates existence. He saw that the line between psychology and spirituality is artificial. To study the psyche is to study the soul, and to heal the soul is to approach the mystery we once called God. For Jung, the great religions were not outdated superstitions, but symbolic systems expressing the same truth. The reconciliation of opposites, the cross, the mandala, the yin and yang, all speak of the same reality, that unity is born from duality. In the Christian myth, God becomes human, spirit and flesh unite. In the Eastern mandala, the four elements converge at the center, the still point where all opposites dissolve. Jung saw these images as psychic maps of individuation. The soul, like the universe, seeks symmetry. But our modern world has forgotten this language. We live in what Jung called a time of spiritual anemia. Our gods have become entertainment, our rituals replaced by consumption. We no longer have temples but shopping malls. No sacred symbols, only brand logos. The modern ego has dethroned the self, and yet the hunger for meaning persists. It leaks out in anxiety, restlessness, and despair. We chase substitutes, success, romance, validation, but nothing external can fill the space reserved for the inner divine. To find meaning again, Jung believed we must reclaim the sacred within the ordinary. This does not mean escaping the world, but seeing through it. Every act of honesty, every moment of self-awareness, every encounter with beauty is an expression of the self. Individuation is not a withdrawal from life. It is a deeper participation in it. The more one becomes conscious, the more one feels connected to others, to nature, to the unfolding mystery of being. Freedom, then, is not the absence of limits, but alignment with the truth of one's nature. The ego that once fought against the soul learns to serve it. The person no longer asks, "What do I want?" but "What is life asking of me?" This shift from will to willingness is the mark of maturity. It is what Jung meant when he said that the second half of life is not about ambition, but about meaning. And yet the work is never done. Individuation is not a goal to achieve, but a path to walk. Each new experience, each relationship, each loss reveals another aspect of the self waiting to be integrated. The psyche is infinite, the process endless. But as one deepens, the fear lessens. One learns to trust the rhythm of the inner world, to allow light and shadow, joy and sorrow, life and death to coexist in the same vast embrace. This is the union of opposites, the realization that love and pain, faith and doubt, creation and destruction are not enemies but partners in the dance of wholeness. Jung once wrote, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, only outgrown." To outgrow a problem is to see it from a higher plane, where its opposites merge into harmony. Wholeness, then, is not perfection. It is peace. It is the quiet knowing that you contain multitudes and that even your contradictions belong. It is the freedom to be complex, to be human, to be divine.